Why do you think we have the gifts of the Spirit? Do we operate in the gifts of the Spirit? What is the purpose of spiritual gifts, if not to enable us to do the work that brings the glory to God Almighty?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to There Is a Word, where we believe there is a word for every situation and circumstance that you're going through. I am Bishop Marcia Dinkins. I am the founder of Black Women Rising and Forever Change Ministries. I am so excited about our topic tonight. We're going to talk about domestic violence. October has been deemed Domestic Violence Awareness Month. However, this is something that occurs every day, every 3 seconds, every 5 seconds. There's a woman being abused. And so what I come tonight to remind you is this, is that domestic violence is violence. And so tonight we have joining us 3 courageous women who will share their story. And I'm glad that they're sharing their story, because one of the things for Black Women Rising is to center the voices of women on the issues that have impacted their lives. And Forever Change Ministries is to be a ministry without walls, where we serve and be in service to the people, where we are allowing people to come in through the doors and share their story. Joining us tonight is Zenene Humphrey-Davis, Nicole Fishman, and Rekitta Peters. Welcome, Queens. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, thank you. Our topic tonight reminds our listeners that domestic violence is violence. And we're going to unpack, to educate and inform the different harms associated with domestic violence. We're going to hear stories of women who have been impacted. And I want to again say thank you all for joining us. It takes great courage. It takes leaps and bounds to come through the walls, the barriers, the stressors and the fights that we have been through. This is something that is close to my heart, because I too have been, I don't even like the word survivor. Maybe before we get off, we can have a new term for this, but I too have been one who has been in a domestic violence situation. And so I want to thank you all again. And to get started, what I'd like to do is to give you all a few minutes to tell our listeners, one, about the work that you do and why you became a voice and a domestic violence advocate. Zenene, we're going to start with you.
Hi, so yes, Zenene Humphrey-Davis, and I am a domestic violence survivor, and I never thought that I would be in this position to even speak on such a platform. Coming out of my situation, I was very, very, very depressed and suicidal, you name it. But now I get to serve at an agency that serves other survivors, and always had a passion for it, applied for many positions in the past, but I believe that it was all in God's timing, that, I had to heal first before I could help anybody. So being here and being able to serve the community, I'm actually in Alabama. We serve 5 different counties where I am. And so just being able to provide the services and just be able to just love on survivors. It's overwhelming to even know that God allowed me to be here. And so currently I serve as executive director at a nonprofit program called Domestic Violence Intervention Center.
Thank you. Nicole, can you tell us about yourself and how you got into this work as a domestic violence advocate and speaker?
Sure. Good evening. So I am a domestic violence survivor. I was with my abuser for well over a decade. We dated as teenagers, went to college together, eventually got married, had children. But throughout that time, like I said, he was very emotionally abusive and physically abusive. I got divorced in 2009, and it wasn't until after the divorce and I kind of progressed through life that I realized that there are so many lasting effects after you leave the situation that you don't really recognize until you're triggered. And so in 2018, of January in 2018, I was out with a friend of mine, and there was something that occurred between that friend of mine at the time that triggered all of my experiences and what I had dealt with my ex-husband. And so from that experience, I realized that I still needed to heal and process from my previous experience. And I decided to write a blog. And from that blog was developed an organization, an LLC called Pillow Talk Pretty Things. So the pillow talk is representative of the conversations that I was having with myself during the time of my abuse and shortly thereafter. And pretty things is the idea of telling yourself the good things that, you know, we have for ourselves, that if we overcome, that we can ascertain those things. So basically with my organization, I work with shelters, I do fundraising, I speak to the clients. I'm also certified in the state of Illinois as an advocate as well. And so the important part about all of that work is essentially putting a face to domestic violence. I think that when people think about domestic violence, they have an image in their head, or it looks like a certain person, whereas domestic violence reaches across all racial, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. Throughout the majority of my abuse, I was a principal of a middle school of 1,100 students. No one knew anything about what was happening behind closed doors, because when you're at home, you're dealing, and I'm sure my colleagues can ascertain to this, when you're at home, you're dealing with your abuse. But when you walk out the door, you have to be a completely different person, because we all have to wear this mask because of what the fear and the shame and the guilt of what we're experiencing. So from that, like I said, I developed my LLC, and I just want to make sure that, you know, people understand that we have to do something to combat the silence that is happening with us, particularly with Black women. And domestic violence is a silent killer because we continue to be silent. And that's not to say that every survivor has to tell her story, but in telling your story, you're putting a face to it, and you're also allowing yourself to heal through that process. So that's my goal, and just to be a support.
Thank you. And we're going to unpack a lot of these things that you all are saying now. I didn't read your bios because I wanted you to tell people more about you. I think you can speak to yourselves a whole lot better than I can. And, you know, trying to put words on the paper never do us any justice. So, Rekitta Peters, I'd also like to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners about the work that you do and why you became a voice and a domestic violence advocate.
Good evening. My name is Rekitta Peters. I was married to my abuser for 11 years. From that union came 2 children. I left the relationship in October of 2010. At that time, my children were 10 and 6 years old. Went through the legal process of getting divorced. I was officially divorced in 2011. Just like my previous colleague said, I was going through the day-to-day routines of being a wife and a mother, working with a professional woman, had finished school and everything, and just going through my day-to-day life, but also dealing with that private abuse at home, and feeling like ashamed and guilt as to how I got myself in that situation. Almost saying to myself eternally, how do you find yourself here? You should know better or whatever. So it was those type of things that were going through my mind internally. Also, I believed in the institution of marriage, till death do you part. You know, going through the raw pastures, with your spouses. I had read and heard that people have, rough patches, and I just thought this was something that was going to eventually pass. But as the years progressed, it got worse, and to the point where it culminated on September 1st, 2010, where I almost lost my life that day. So I had to make a decision if I wanted to live, not only for myself, but also for my two children that were at that time 10 and 6 years old. I went through the legal process of getting a divorce. I went through counseling for many years, and through that, through those years, after leaving the marriage and leaving the home that we shared, and moving out with my two children, small children, I began to, see God's grace, in my life, and how people had helped me and helped my children. And that around 2015, I began to, feel the need to want to serve and want to be a blessing back to the people who have been a blessing to me, or at least to help someone else like I have been helped over the years. And God basically gave me this vision, and He just gave me the name Purple Vision. I didn't know, how I was going to use that name, what purpose it was going to be used for. But I know that He gave me a vision to help women who were in the same situation that I was in, and also try to help them not even to get into that situation. So I just wanted to continue to serve, and I said if I could help one person, make a better choice, make a better life for them and their families, then I feel like I've, served my purpose, or one of my purposes of being alive. And so I launched my blog in 2017 on October 20th, 2017. This month, it made 4 years that I've been using my blog, Purple Vision, to educate, to empower, to encourage victims and survivors of domestic violence based on my own, life experience. And I'm trying to be as transparent as I could, and also trying to encourage and hopefully save someone's life where they won't find themselves in that same situation. And I've been, blogging, all those years, and it's been also a healing, therapeutic for me as well, because it allows me to release some things that I felt, guilt and shame about, being a victim of some domestic violence, and not wanting to, disappoint people, not wanting to people to judge me, which I find that sometimes we can do. Sometimes we ask the victim, why you just didn't leave, and then not
We're gonna,
realizing and stuff like that. So I went through that kind of internal battle, internal struggle as well. But
yeah.
through the grace of God and through counseling, it kind of like helped me to recognize and realize that, I had a better way of living, and I also could use what I went through to help someone else. So basically, that's what I've been doing, and raising my kids, and by the grace of God, I'm still here.
That is so powerful. And we did put your blog, we listed your blog. Thank you for sharing your story. As I said, we are going to unpack a lot of this. And truthfully, we don't have enough time to unpack everything. So just know I'm putting you all on notice. I definitely would like to continue this conversation because we not only do we have to educate and inform, but we have to inspire. And what I love about the names that you have, Pillow Talk, pretty things, and Purple Vision. When you think about what purple represents, the royalty, it's almost like just rewriting a story. When you're talking about, the purple and the Pillow Talk. The first thing that came to my mind, Miss Fishman, was just a soft landing place, a place where you could just land and know that you're okay. And the thing about pillows is they come in different shapes, different sizes. They have a pillow for your back, for your side, for your front. And that just says to me that you are covered. But not only that, that you get to look at yourself in a different way. And then, the work that Miss Zenene is doing, just in realizing and helping people to helping other women to understand, that they have voice. And I love the ways that all three of you are giving voice and visibility, to this issue, rather than, as you said before, silence is really violence. And it's silent, it's violent because there are so many women who don't come forward. And that brings me to my next question. One of the reasons, that I know sometimes you don't even think that this is occurring. You don't even think that you're really being abused. And I'd like to ask you, each of you, starting with you, Nicole, because you mentioned something that really stood out to me. You had been with your husband ever since you were a teenager. And, and it made me think about, did the violence occur when you were young? Did it start as a teenager? And if so, did that also play a role in you not really seeing what was going on, because it started occurring at such a young age? Because a lot of people, and also would you speak on the fact of how our young girls are also subjected to this, to domestic violence at a young age. And I'll say the one thing that I don't like, and you can, take it, is when we tell our children, when they are little girls, and they say, "Oh, he hit me," and we say, "Oh, that's okay, he likes you."
You're absolutely right. I was going to touch upon that, but I'll start to answer the other questions that you had asked about how soon my abuse started. So let me preface by saying that I was raised in like what I would call the equivalent of like a Cosby household. My parents loved each other to death. There were no arguments. There were no fighting, no fights that, I was privy to. Very loving home. Both of my parents, worked. Very supportive, always kept us in activities, and we were always, engaged in something positive. Of course, being a church kid, you have Bible study, you have, BTU, you have choir practice, you have praise dance practice. So we were always involved in doing activities. Who was then my boyfriend at the time, actually, we went to church together. We went to Sunday school together. And thinking back and understanding and recognizing kind of how the abuse started, I remember very, very clearly, it was Christmas time, and a friend of mine who I was very close to at the time, who was a male, had come over to our home. I was 17, and he was helping my mom put together the Christmas tree. It was just like a neighborhood thing. It wasn't a big deal. And my boyfriend at the time came over, and he was so livid and upset by the fact that, a friend of mine was there who was a male, and there was literally, we were just friends. And I went outside to walk him out the door, my boyfriend at the time, and he like pulled me and grabbed me through the door. And he was like, "What's going on?" He didn't quite say it that nicely, but he was like, "What's going on?" And I was completely, taken aback. I was like, "There's nothing going on." And I think because my house, my upbringing was so safe, there was really never like a reason for my parents to sit down with me and have this conversation like, you need to be aware of these red flags. You need to be aware if a guy is doing this, that means he probably has some other control issues. So we never really had those conversations. And that's not a fault of my parents. That's just, I was raised in just a sheltered home, and everything was, peaches and cream. So as that's progressed, it wasn't like it was just all of the time. And that's the thing. I kind of tell this metaphor that if you think about a frog in boiling water, if you put a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out immediately, right? Because the water is boiling and it's hot. But if you sit a frog in water and you gradually increase the flame, the frog will stay in there because they're going to be so used to the water heating up. Ultimately, as the water boils, the frog is going to die. That's what domestic abuse is like. It's not something that just happens right away, because if it were, most of us wouldn't be in this situation. It's a gradual pulling in and drawing in of making yourself feel like you can't do anything without this person, making yourself feel like the only way that you can be worthy of love is with this person. Of course, the abuser makes you feel like no one else will ever love you, or no one else will ever like you. And as a teenager, that can become very, that can really have an impact on you, because of course, as a teenager, you're developing this identity, right? And if you get someone who is controlling and negative, that's going to feed into your identity as far as how you see yourself. And of course, and then going away to college, it diminished a little bit because we were doing separate things in college. However, there were several incidences that I had to deal with in relation to him, but I felt a little bit safer because, like I said, we were a little bit more separate. And there's always this momentum of like, I'm sorry, or there's always like these periods in between where it's not happening. And then you have these, is what I call being love bombed, right? So you're getting flowers, you're getting gifts, you're getting, all of these accolades. But at the end of the day, it's going to come back because he has a mental illness. He has a control issue, right? But you're so immersed by that point, it's like, how do I get away? It's like you don't even realize in your mind like what's happening, right? And that continues to keep you in that situation because, and let's just be honest, dysfunction can become comfortable if at a point that's all you know. And stepping out of that box and out of that toxicity is very scary. And I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's many reasons why women stay, and they're very personal reasons, right? For me personally, the reason why I ended up staying was because my husband at the time threatened that if I left, he would kill me. And I believed that he had the capability of doing that. So rather than dying, I chose to stay because I had, 3 girls at the time with him. And I think another thing to point out is that the most dangerous time for a victim who's dealing with domestic violence is not when she's in the crux of the domestic violence. It's actually when she leaves. That's when the majority of us are killed. That's when the majority of us are maimed. That's when the majority of us are stalked. And so, when you're talking to a victim, the worst thing you can tell them, to be honest, is to just get up and leave. Because if it were really that easy, we would do it, right? And if it were that safe, then we would do it. And we see all of the time on the news, she had a restraining order or he was out on bail or bond and she gets killed anyway. So the most dangerous time is when you leave. And so you have to balance, you have to exist in this duality of, which can be nerve-wracking. I'm sure my colleagues can speak to this. It's very nerve-wracking. I'm not safe here and I'm not safe here. What am I going to do? So I hope that answers some of the questions, but it's just this idea of, if it's happening to you as a teenager and that system continues to persist, you become indoctrinated to that. And it's very, very hard to come out of that. And just thinking about like the teens because I'm an educator, thinking about teenagers today, we don't have enough dating prevention programs. We don't have enough programs at kindergarten, first grade, second grade that talks about what it means to, safely engage with someone else. We may talk about, sexual abuse and that sort of thing, but we really don't talk about dating violence. And those that are impacted between the ages of 18 and 24, they've not had any prevention. There's not enough prevention in our schools. And particularly when we talk about Black girls, our Black girls are already marginalized as it is, more than any other population. Our girls are hypersexualized. They're considered to be hypersexualized. So teachers, administrators, counselors see them as women and they are children. But because they see them as women, they treat them a certain way. They treat them harsher. And what ends up happening is Black boys see this and they internalize that. And then they feel like they can do the same thing. And this just it's a system. It's an awful system. And we're just indoctrinated to believe that we have to, that everyone else matters but us. And so we have to do all these things because everyone else is supposed to matter. So we have to cater to everyone else. And it's systemic. And until we break the system, until we actually admit what's happening in our communities, until we actually admit the fact that domestic violence in and of itself is the biggest threat to the Black family, and it's the biggest threat to Black women, because it not only kills your physical body, but it destroys your spirit. And if your spirit is destroyed, it's very hard to get out of that dark hole. Very difficult.
Thank you so much. And I don't think a lot of people realize or recognize that it starts off young. How how young men see their fathers treating a woman, or how a young girl sees what her mother accepts. That all comes into the psyche. And like you said, and the fact that state sanctioned violence or labels, automatically label our children in a really negative way. Like you said, young girls go, even if when they go to juvenile justice, they're raped, and abused because, again, they're not supposed to be seen as young girls. And I'm glad that you spoke to the fact of how the schools do it too, and how this becomes a systemic this is a systemic issue, that is just, going down the line. And one thing that you said that really stood out is you said, everyone matters but us. And so, Miss Humphrey-Davis, what I'd like for you to, I'd like to ask, because that's a powerful statement, everyone matters but us. And I can't help but to think about the victim blaming when women come and they really want to share their story, but the victim blaming. And so why is it that women are blamed for what happens to them? And understanding, because this is one of the greatest barriers to reporting domestic violence.
I think because there's just no understanding, no true understanding of domestic violence. And so if we're not careful, if people are not careful, they will shift the blame to the victim. They'll start asking questions like my colleague just stated that, why didn't you leave, or why didn't you just leave? And if you understand the dynamics of DV and what it does to the mind, what it does to your spirit, like she stated, what it does to you, just your entire being, then you understand that it takes so much to make that step. And even if you make that step, you may not continue into it. I mean, for me, I left my second marriage, I don't know how many times, and went back because of so many different, different issues, wanting to make sure that I had a place to live for my children, wanting to make sure that, I didn't drop the ball in certain areas. Like if I needed to get to work, I needed to do all these other things, and just not wanting to be viewed as a failure, wanting my marriage to work, all those things. And so again, I think it just goes back to understanding the dynamics of DV. I think if as a whole, as a society, we understand the dynamics of DV, then we won't be so quick to shift the blame or to even ask those questions that indicate blame.
That is so true. And you see that so many times, even in the courtroom, where you just don't want to go because you've been blamed. And and I'd like to go to Rekitta, Ms. Peters. Miss Humphrey-Davis, stated she went back multiple times. And I heard you say, that you returned, you had children. And each one of you mentioned you had children. I had children. And so that's one of those factors. But when I think about, returning and people not understanding why a woman returns. I'd like to ask you to speak to, what was it like for you, when you knew that you were at that point of, yes, I want to leave, but.
For me, it was similar to what my colleague said. I was trying to give consideration to my kids. Also, like I stated earlier, I believed in the institution of marriage. And I believed at that time, that, I was to honor my marriage, to that due sport, And as I began to really study, really study God's word for myself, and begin to understand that this is now how God wants, his daughters to live, and begin to recognize and realize that, I didn't want to leave my own children motherless, and I had to make some hard decisions about, the fact that who was going to raise my kids if something was to, happen to me. I came from a very good family, supportive mother, supportive father. But at that time, they were getting older as well, and they love my kids, at that time, and they still love my kids. My mother's now deceased now, but, I had to start really, looking at some real hard facts about, as a result of my choice of going back and constantly enduring this, how was that choice going to affect my kids' future, not only my future, but my children's future, and I have a son and a daughter, and I didn't want my son to feel like this was normal. You know, at that time he was only 6 years old, but I had to think about the fact that, you know, if he constantly was around this, you know, and my daughter was constantly around this, I didn't want them to think that this was how a husband and wife should, you know, interact with each other, or this is how a husband should treat his wife. I didn't want my son to think this is how he should treat a woman. I didn't want my daughter to think this is how she should be treated by a man. So that was like I said, was also heavy on my mind, you know, as I was going through the process. And like Miss Humphrey-Davis said, and I went back several times, you know, I went back multiple times trying to you know, give it another try, you know, trying to, and I wanted to be, I think I'm very conscientious, you know, I wanted to be clear and sure that I was making the right choice, you know. I didn't want to make a choice that I felt that I would regret, that would hurt my family as well, hurt my children. And that was a constant battle with me. God, is this, you know, really what you want me to do? I was fasting, I was praying, I was, you know, trying to get some kind of clear understanding or clear, decisive answer for me in my situation if I was making a good choice, you know, and if the choices I made was going to be not only good for myself but for my kids, you know. So but you know, my parents also played a profound role in my life at that time. My mother asked me that question, you know, if something happens to you, who is going to raise your children, you know? Because at the time I was married, I also had two stepsons. He was married before. When I met him, his first wife had been dead like 5 years, and he had two small sons that I also was helping to raise in the house as well. But you know, I looked at all of us as family, you know, and I wanted to, keep, like Miss Humphrey-Davis said, you wanted to make your marriage work. You know, like my other colleague said, you wanted to, you know, keep your family together. And that was a constant battle with me. But I think for me, as the years began to go by, and it seemed like every anniversary, the abuse intensified. I mean, on our anniversary date, it was like the devil was just raging in our house. Every year that I was married, it seemed like it got worse. It intensified. The abuse intensified. The disruption in the house intensified. And every year on our anniversary, it would be like where people will be probably in a celebratory mood or a reflective move or a loving move as a husband and wife. You know, celebrate another year of being married. In my household, it was always disruption. You know, it was almost like, you know, I kind of felt like the devil was mad because, you know, we were still, you know, and I was still in this union. And, you know, it was like I kind of felt like the devil was doing everything he could to disrupt or break up the union. And I was still trying to, you know, hang in there, you know, and that's how I pictured it, you know, every anniversary. I can't recall any anniversary where it was a celebratory time in my house. I can't, not one. And I was married 11 years. And I never had an anniversary where, you know, and I'm not saying with people always have a big party, but just, you know, just to celebrate or honor the union, you know, I don't recall ever having that, you know. So, you know, it's a lot of dynamics that go into it when you leave and when you stay. And only the person that goes through it can really attest to it, you know, or the person that has been through it can really attest to the different levels of emotions and the different levels of decision making and things that you consider, you know. And I really believe that you'll know when it's time to go. I really believe that. I really believe it'll come to a situation where, and I hate to say it, I don't want to say that it has to be where someone gets killed or gets hurt, but I really believe if you constantly, you know, pray and do self-evaluation, and it'll, you know, God will show you, you know, when it's time, just, you know, to say it's enough. Because in my situation, I really believe that my husband probably still would have stayed in the marriage, because you know, in my opinion, he liked the benefits of being married, but he didn't want to be married. He wanted to live as if he was, you know, single, and he would tell me, you know, I'm not going to change. You know, I'm not going to, you know. Now that's not how he portrayed himself when we were, you know, dating. you know, when I met him, it was like, you know, I want a family, you know, I want to raise, you know, I want us to have children, you know, I want to build a life with you. But once I got into the marriage, he began to tell me, you know, I'm not going to change, you know. So it's like, and so God began to deal with me and tell me, if he's not going to change, Rekitta, then you're going to have to make a change. You're going to have to make a decision, you know, if you want to stay in this marriage or if you want to, you know, get out of this marriage.
Yeah. And, you know, Rekitta, one of the things that I think about is how women who hold true, you know, our faith, our belief,
Mm-hmm.
those systems that should be safe systems, how even those systems become unsafe systems.
Mm-hmm.
And how we, you know, I loved how Nicole mentioned, you know, she came from, you know, the Cosby family, and she was raised in the church and all of that. And that, you know, that was a safe space, you know, but now to go to a pastor, and I can say I've seen where pastors have, you know, taken the same ideology or the same belief that if you are married, then you go back, you know, and not really helping women to come out of those situations. And even the historical context of things with us as Black women, we also have to take into consideration how back in the old, you know, in our elders' days, you stayed no matter what, and you took. And so a lot of these things have really made us generationally complicit to what goes on, and it makes it difficult. And you know, Nicole, you mentioned about emotional and physical, and you know, I'd like to ask, is starting with you, Zenene. Domestic violence is seen. Domestic violence. Nicole mentioned the emotional and the physical, and people often think domestic violence is hitting. It's all physical. They don't think of any other ways. And I'll say, if either, after Zenene answers, if either, you know, Nicole or Rekitta, you also want to piggyback. But I'd like for you all to educate the audience, our listeners, as to the other forms of domestic abuse. People don't realize that there are so many complexities and layers to this, that it's not just the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. I've heard, you know, there's other forms of abuse that comes inside of that domestic abuse. So Zenene, if you could start us off in answering that question, I greatly appreciate it.
Yes, so financial abuse is one that I definitely can speak to. I experienced that, and the way that I experienced it was that he would basically sabotage me from going to work. He would either take the car, he would start a fight, and even if I did go to work, I wouldn't be in any mindset to be at work. He would call the job numerous times. He would show up at the job to the point to where I would have to let security know that, hey, this is going on, you know, in my household right now today, and I need you to be on alert because he's going to probably come by. Things like that. And even with the money, wanting to have control over all the money, wanting to tell me what I could and cannot spend money on, although I was working and making money. It wasn't a mutual decision. I know, you know, in some families, there's a mutual decision that one person will be in control of the finances and, you know, and so forth. But that's not what it was. It was I'm going to tell you what to spend, when to spend it, how to spend it. You're going to give me the money. I'm going to go in your purse and get the money if I need to, and just things like that. So definitely the financial abuse, it definitely exists. And a lot of people don't recognize that as being a form of domestic violence, but it is.
Yeah, that's so true. Nicole, what would you like to add to that?
Sure. I think that, you know, I do want to go back to the spiritual abuse because I think it's so important to talk about that. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because one of the greatest safe havens for Black women is the church. And if you don't have access to a safe space, you're going to continue to be in that situation. And to be very frank and candid, our institutions of worship and faith have not done a good job in ministering to the issues that are relevant in domestic violence. You have women sitting in your congregations every Sunday right next to their abuser. And you're preaching sermons, you're teaching sermons that talk about marriage, that speak from Ephesians, that speak from 1 Corinthians, but you're not, and you're talking about submission, but you're not appropriately framing it through doctrine. It's not being appropriately framed through the historical context, through the language translation. And so all of these men are hearing is this idea of, you need to submit to me. Yes, I still have the power. Yes, I am still the head of the house. And it's not being taught appropriately. Not only that, there aren't ministries. Some churches have them, but there aren't enough ministries within the church that actually help women who are escaping, that provide food and clothing, that provide, shelter, emergency shelter, that will provide you, underground shelter if it's necessary, that will link you to resources. I will say in the Black church, we have a lot of resources and we do help the community immensely. But when we're talking about helping women, we mirror what happens in society. We're at the bottom of what needs to be taking place. We want to be quiet. When a young girl gets pregnant, she's sat down. When a minister in the pulpit does something, he's still up there preaching every Sunday. What is that teaching women in the congregation? That whatever happens to you, you know what, you're a woman, it is what it is, you deal with it, pass the tray. And we have to move away from that. It's not safe and it's not healthy. So spiritual abuse is, and not only in Christian churches, but I'm talking about, if you're in a synagogue or you're in a mosque, or you're, Seventh-day Adventist, I don't care what it is. This is in all denominations, all walks of life, all faith, all houses of faith. So that the spiritual abuse is something that just continues, and we have to have that addressed. Another part of abuse that we really need to consider and think about that happens regularly is rape and sexual abuse. That is a significant part of the abuse that some women deal with in intimate partner violence. And the trauma that it has on your body and your psyche, like there were times, the majority of my marriage, I could not sleep. I was afraid to go to sleep. And so because I'm afraid to go to sleep, imagine like just this idea of just not, I was a walking zombie, literally, because I felt like as soon as I closed my eyes, something's happening, right? So that's another form, just that threat. And then another form of abuse that we've seen with COVID, with quarantine abuse. So this idea that, so we're quarantined, right? But this idea of, I have COVID, so I'm going to make you sick. Though this is before we really understood what COVID was. I have COVID, so I'm going to make you sick, or you made me sick with COVID. And so now because of that, I'm going to abuse you, and I have the right to do that because you've made me sick. Or I'm going to threaten to get the kids sick. Or I'm going to force you, we have to stay home. You have nowhere to go. You have no one to talk to. So quarantine abuse, we know that the statistics have told us that domestic violence during quarantine, out the charts. We know that many of our shelters were closed because we just didn't understand at the time. Where were these women going? They were all at home. And we also know that quarantine and COVID, for people who were just regular, normal, had no issues, there was strife in the home. Look at how many marriages were dissolved. Look at how many relationships were dissolved. So put that pressure on top of already a violent household, and you have a ticking time bomb. And I think we're going to continue to see the effects and the impact of quarantine abuse. So those are some of the things that I wanted to add to the types of different abuse that we're seeing that are relevant for sure.
I think those are two powerful. What you both said is really powerful, and I'll ask Rekitta to chime in. Is people, you hit it on the head when it comes to the church. Now, a couple of years ago, I did trainings with pastors on how to recognize domestic abuse, how to support, and also how to help women, train others to prepare safety plans to help women get out. But you're absolutely right. It's still a failure. on the side of faith institutions. It is still a failure because the pastor is abusing his wife, or the deacons and elders, or whatever the denominational title is. They're abusive in so many ways. And the truth is, the pastor is abusive to the congregation when he's controlling, and he wants you to do whatever he wants you to do. And people really don't think that, and they think, oh, I'm being loyal. But the truth is, you're being spiritually abused, and people just don't recognize it. I remember mentioning, and somebody said, well, what is spiritual abuse? And this is the very thing that keeps your heart and your soul lacerated and wounded, and creates these trauma bonds. A lot of people say, oh, that's my soulmate. No, honey, he is your trauma bond. That is your trauma bond. They keep you entangled up. And we're going to offer some trainings around that to help women maneuver, and to understand that. But spiritual abuse and quarantine abuse, oh my gosh, you hit it on the head. Even when the weather changes, let's not just say quarantine. When it gets wintertime, it gets worse. People say the hotter it gets, depending on where you are, they can tell, what's going to happen in that particular community. And we would see it during the wintertime and the hottest seasons, that domestic abuse would increase. Rekitta, would you like to add something, to the conversation? Would you like to add something to the conversation that's being held now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I also want to add mental and psychological abuse. A lot of times, when you're in it so long, you begin to think that you're the problem. That it must be something that you're doing, because you're hearing this over and over again. You're trying to not say or do anything to to keep the peace in the house, and not recognizing, like my colleague said, it's not you. It's just the person has their own issues, that they haven't dealt with, and they're basically transferring or taking their frustrations out on you. But I can remember, just trying to keep the peace, whatever that means, to you, just trying to make sure. I was always a person, and I still am to this day, a creature of habit. I go to work. I was always a routine person. My routine is almost like I'm very predictable. And that's just my personality. And I would go home. I would, make sure that my children, the kids were fed. Everybody did their homework, took their baths, So I had a routine. It was like every day it was the same routine. I mean, you could predict, when I got off of work, I was coming straight. I was going to pick up my children and come straight home, And so it was like you could almost pinpoint, my routine, particularly Monday through Friday, particularly when the children were in school, and even during the summertime, I planned every aspect of the children's activities during the summer. So it was really nothing that he really had to deal with in terms of the kids, because I was dealing with all of that, other than work, and, help, which is what a man, does, or should do, help, support and raise his family. So I planned the activities for the summer for the children. I planned the activities after school for the children. So I would pick them up, I would bring them to school. So everybody was, pretty much by 9, my house was basically shut down. And when I say shut down, I mean everybody was in bed, ready for the next day. And I could attest to what Miss Nicole just said about I never got a full night's sleep. I never could sleep in peace. I would be exhausted many nights after working all day, coming home, selling the children down, getting them ready, for the next day to go to school. But I never could get a full night's sleep. Never. My rest would always be broken with some kind of like Miss Humphrey-Davis said, some type of argument. It would be always like when I'm ready to settle down at nighttime, something would always come up, and the house would always be in disarray. So I would say mental and psychological abuse, most definitely, because if you stay in it long enough, you begin to think that you're the problem and not the person that's actually starting the problem, and keeping the problem up. And I'm not saying that we don't have a responsibility as far as not taking care of ourselves, but I'm saying that you begin to internalize and think, well, it must be me, because you begin to think, believe the lie, I should say, that is you, even though we know as survivors, once we get out of it and begin to get the counseling that we need, we begin to see I call it the mind games that being in that type of situation for years can have on you, can have on your, not only that, your self-esteem as well, you know, because like you said, you kind of like living two lives. You're living a different life when you go to work, because you know you have to perform, you have to make sure you take care of yourself and take care of your family. And then when you go home, you live in another life, you know, and then when it begins to spill over to your job, that becomes economic abuse, financial abuse. You have a joint checking account, a saving account, and all of a sudden all the money's been drawn out, and I went through all that, or you have a good job and the threat is, oh, I don't want this person coming on my job, starting any confusion, and I lose my job. So I pretty much, as I hear my colleagues speak, have been through every form of abuse in that marriage at some point in time. It didn't happen all at once, but at some point in time, I pretty much experienced all of them. So I would definitely add to that economic, financial abuse, and mental and psychological abuse as well.
Yeah. And those are the hardest ones. I used to say to people, even though none of this is warranted, none of it. I remember holding my daughter and her father throwing me down to the ground and choking me. I couldn't even tell you for what reason. And it took his mother to pull him off of me. And when you talk about that, there are things in our lives that for me, I disconnected. I just really numbed out and disconnected. And so things that I should have been naming as abuse, I wasn't even naming as abuse. We sometimes, people, as you were saying, Rekitta, it is this thing of the mental, the psychological, and then all of that inner critic chatter, the shame, as we used to call them, shame monkeys on your shoulder, and guilt, just having an exchange in the conversation, having us to think that it's our fault. But the truth of the matter is you get so beat down from hearing the same thing over and over and over again, that you begin to believe. There's a book out called Uninvited by Lisa Turkhurst. And she, the one thing that she had in her book that really stood out to me when I did a book study for women, because I really did a book study some years ago helping women to overcome abuse, but she talked about the lie, and the label, how it all starts. And I believe that's how abuse starts, the lie, the line, and the label. And we began to wear those things. And it's so many dynamics, I think, that people, again, as you all are so powerfully stating here, there are so many complexities and dynamics. And another thing that comes to my mind is I remember when my children's father was abusive, and I would leave the house and he would try to break in. He tried to come in through a window one time. And, all of those different things that the courts don't even say are abuse, that's attached to the domestic situation. And they treat everything separately, as opposed to looking at that person as someone who is, committing an offense, a domestic abuse offense. And so they get numbed, and then they never get charged with, I know where I live at in Ohio, they don't start off charging them with domestic abuse. They always get a lower sentence.
Bishop, can I add something to what you're saying?
Oh, yes, you can.
Thank you. I did want to, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to add this issue of judicial abuse and how it impacts particularly Black women, and so that the listeners or those that are viewing understand kind of how the court system works. When you go to court, let's say to get an emergency order of protection, and it's somebody that you live with, the court will ask you if you want to have an advocate that will help you fill out your paperwork. When you're filling out this paperwork, there are so many questions and so many things that they're asking, and for so many specific things. And if you have an advocate, fortunately, the advocate will walk you through what exactly it is that you need to say. Because if you don't say the right things and you go in front of that judge, they're not going to grant you an emergency order of protection. And what I've seen in being in courtrooms with victims, I have seen clear disparities as to how judges will award an emergency order of protection when it comes to Black women versus women of other ethnicities and races. When they're being questioned, the tone is harsher, the speech is quicker to cut you off mid-sentence. There's a clear discrepancy as far as how Black women are treated in the courtroom. And not only that, another abuse of when you get to this system is when you're filling out your paperwork, you have to put your address as to where you're going to be. How is that helping? If I'm in a shelter or if I'm hiding out, I have to put the address of where I'm located. It's like a smoking gun, right? And any judge will tell you a restraining order is nothing but a piece of paper. It's necessary, but it's nothing but a piece of paper. It's not something that's going to necessarily keep your abuser away from you. So the system in and of itself is not necessarily designed to be a barrier to that abuse. And so it's like you leave the home and you go to court. It's like you're being abused all over again because you have to retell all this information. You know, you may get a judge who's just not sympathetic or empathetic at all. And then not only that, like you're saying in Ohio, same thing in Chicago. In Chicago, if you want to press charges, you have to go from the police station to downtown to do the paperwork again. Then you get a court date. It's like this cycle. Like they make it very, very difficult for you to prosecute. And then when you do, it's a class. They have to do a class, or they have to do 15 hours of community service. And there's levels to it. To each offense, but by the time, something happens to you, it could have been rectified prior to. So it's like the judicial system just abuses us all over again. So I wanted to make that it's very difficult to prosecute. It's very difficult for us. I mean, we didn't even have a Violence Against Women Act until 1994. 1994. It was said in 1994, it's not okay to abuse women. Now just let that sit with you for just a minute. Because prior to that, domestic violence was considered an issue between a husband and a wife. And every year that bill comes up to pass, there's always a split vote. It's not unanimous. Yeah, we want to protect women. It's always something. Because again, as women, we're simply not valued the way that we need to be. And we see that in our judicial system. So that's just another form of abuse that's related to intimate partner violence. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you for adding to that. Zenene, I saw where you stated judges order visitation and reset the protection from abuse hearings. Can you say more about that? And the other thing that I'd like to, as we begin to wrap up, that bothers me the most is the person who is being abused takes that, as you said, Nicole, there's very little protection for them. But the very time that woman, that individual just snaps, goes back to what you said, Rekitta, that mental breakdown from being traumatized for so long, that person is incarcerated.
Absolutely.
Woman shoots the gun in the air just to protect herself, no one else. She's incarcerated. And so I'd like for you to just expound on when you talk about the order of visitation and resetting the protection, from abuse hearings, but also looking at the fact of expounding on, what are some of the ways that we as a community, what are some of the ways that we can help? And so I'll start with you, Zenene.
Yes, I did want to speak to that. We actually experience this often, where in our courtrooms, the judges will hear. So if the abuser has filed a petition for visitation because the survivor has left and has taken the children and has gone into shelter or gone to a relative's home or wherever they have sought safety at, we have saw where judges will actually order that visitation and reset the protection from abuse hearings for whatever reason. It could be something as simple as an attorney had another hearing that they had to attend, and so But what should be done is that you should reset both of them. If that's the case, if you're going to reset the protection from abuse order, then reset the visitation or request as well. Because what they're doing is they're forcing a survivor to have to give their child back to the very person that they have ran from. And yes, you have to sort it all out in court and all of that, but why take that chance? Why put someone through that? And we see it so much it's just disturbing. And it bothers not only the survivor, who now has to spend however many hours worried about their child because that child has to go for visitation. It also affects the advocates that are doing this work because they're also worried and concerned. It's not just a job for, people that work in these positions, and if they're just in it for a job, they don't last very long. But when you're in it because it's a passion, because you actually care, because you want to see change, that bothers you. And so it's not right. And I think that as citizens of every community, we have to get in the lawmakers' ears. We have to get in the judges' ears. We have to be a voice for our survivors who may not have a voice, because they're standing in front of a judge who is saying, hey, yeah, you got to let this baby go, 2-year-old baby go and be with the person that you ran from 3 days ago or a week ago. And it's sad and it's troublesome.
You're absolutely right. And the fear that comes with that, because the person that the child is going with. Ms. Peters, can you take about 2 minutes and just kind of expound on, what Ms. Humphrey said? What would you like to add as we're wrapping up?
I do agree with her about the fact that the victim seems to be in the judicial system. Sometimes it seems like they're more against us than for us in terms of the order protection. Then you have to deal with the court system as far as the visitation. You're concerned about your children in terms of what's going to happen to them. Like Ms. Humphrey-Davis spoke of, it affects you psychologically because why you left the household, the relationship, and then the judge saying, well, the father has his rights, for visitations with the children or child, and sometimes sometimes I feel it can make you feel like you're trying to keep the child from having a relationship with the father, which is not the case. You're just trying to protect the child or children from what you endured in the relationship, because you're still dealing with the trauma of that relationship, and you don't want the frustrations that person may have towards you to be taken out on the children. So you can be made to feel like you're trying to keep the child, quote unquote, from having a relationship with the father. But in all actuality, that's not the case. It's just that you're concerned about the welfare of the child, and you're concerned about that anger not being transferred to the child that was already imposed upon the mother. Because what better way to get back at the mother for leaving than through the children, through the child or children, and I think that was and I can only speak from my own personal experience, but that's what, my thought process was. My thing is, if you had an issue with me, deal with me, don't take it out on the child or the children, because they are innocent. They have nothing to do with whatever frustrations or concerns or whatever you have towards me as an individual, and so that was always my concern. I was always concerned about, if you don't want to, sincerely be with the children or spend quality time with the children, then they can stay at home with me. I have everything. I felt like at that time I had what I needed to make sure that my children were comfortable. And I know, and people say you say your children, but and I know it's not my children alone, but that was just my way of speaking to what my concern was, that I had everything at home to make sure that my children were comfortable and had the things that they needed. And I felt like if I if you didn't want to be with them or you didn't want to spend time with them and you was just doing it to get back at me, I felt like that was a disservice to the children, and and making me feel like I'm trying to keep you from spending time with your children was never the case. It was just that I was concerned about your anger being transferred to them. I'll put it that way. I don't think people really understand the dynamics what abusers, survivors go through when you're dealing with the aspect with the kids, because it's always made to seem like we're the bad person. We're trying to keep you or that person from having a relationship with their father, and that's farthest from the truth. We're just concerned about that anger not being transferred to them. At least that's how I felt at that time.
That is so true. And I've seen it far too many times where children were used against the parent to get back to the mother. And while we are lifting up, violence against women, I do want to acknowledge that, yes, the highest rates of abuse is against women, but I don't want men to think that we are not acknowledging that women abuse men too, because we are also seeing that. So I know there were some questions or a question or two in the chat, and I'd like to take a moment to answer those questions. Are the trainings offered only from a religious perspective? Thank you for that question. No, the trainings are not offered from just a religious perspective. There is, it's a training for whomever would like to be a part. It can be developed if we do have to take it and really use it for, people in the religious sector. However, when people use that term soulmate, they use it universally. So this is not just one that's offered from a religious perspective. It is just offered to help women or persons who are in that situation to understand what a trauma bond is, how they developed, to be able to just do some reflection with self and to get a set of tools, even if it's no more than planting the seed. I know oftentimes people will say, oh, you can get as much training as you like, or until they're ready to leave, they won't leave. The reality is people have been ready to leave or been ready to be out of situations for a long time, but you still have to have that support. Even if you go through a training, the seed is being planted. And that's what we have to realize. A lot of people, when we were doing the training for the pastors, that's what I had heard. Well, why are you doing that? People aren't going to, come until they're ready. The bottom line is if somebody comes, they're ready. They're ready. They may not take all of the steps needed and necessary to change the situation. And even if that moment is helping somebody to come out of the situation that they're in, the mere fact that you showed up and at least we're creating a safe space, yes. You're ready. It's just like putting a seed in the ground.
Yes.
That seed doesn't automatically grow.
Yes.
And that seed is going to go through some changes before it finally comes up and busts up through the ground. And so I just want to, just say a lot of times that has been one of the biggest things for me when we were doing like that clergy training or, other things that I've done. And people were like, but it is not for us. It is just the point of we are planting seeds. And if the seeds had not been planted, you all would not be doing what you're doing, advocating, educating, inspiring, activating, fighting, in all of the different ways. And so, Sandroid, again, I hope that helps. No, it is not just being offered from a religious perspective. It is, it's a universal training and a universal conversation. I want to thank Ms. Fishman, Nicole, Nicole, Zenene, and Rekitta. I want to first thank you and thank you for allowing us to hear your stories. Thank you for allowing us to witness you. Thank you even for having the courage to stand up. And I hope that this encourages and inspires another woman, another young girl, another male, another community member, another faith leader, another police officer, another social worker, whomever it is. I really hope that this has inspired people to humanize this situation that we go through, to humanize the fact, that women do matter. Young girls do matter. Life does matter. And we have to think about it. Another thing that comes up, LGBTQ plus community or the trans community, there is so much abuse there, and because of assumptions and man, it burns my bridge. I'm clergy, but it doesn't matter. People are people, and who you are is who you are. And there's some people who will not agree with me, but at the end of the day, that's between them and their maker. At the end of the day, what we are to do is to love. And so everything that I do, I approach it with an inclusive lens. And sometimes we all have to speak and sit with one another. If I took you from a from a historical context, like you said, Nicole, Jesus sat with everybody. What makes me any different? What makes me any different? So are the trainings LGBTQ friendly? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. At the end of the day, abuse is abuse, and we need to confront it on every level. Elder abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, state-sanctioned violence, domestic violence, mental, physical, whatever. We have to confront it on every level, because otherwise these nuances and complexities, they sit within our community. And the last question that I have, because it sits with our community, and if you can give me a 1-minute answer, each one of you, because it sits in our communities, how does it impact our community? This is like a speed date. Nicole, you go first.
It breaks down the family narrative between a husband and a wife, or a man and a woman, and it destroys our generations. It destroys our seeds, because our seeds are growing up in broken homes, in toxic homes, and that becomes embedded in our DNA, and that continues generationally. It's as simple as that. We'll never move forward. We'll never be economically stable. We'll never we will never demand the things that we are deserving of until we fix that generational curse.
Okay, Zenene, your turn.
I think it affects all areas. It affects our ministries. It affects our schools. We see violence showing up in the schools because, again, kids are growing up, seeing it, living it, growing up to think that it's okay. So to me, it affects all areas. It affects the workplace. You can't be productive if you're being abused at home. You could try, and we all have done it. Like we said earlier, we put on the mask, we go try to get it done. But I guarantee you, in some area, something was affected by what we were going through at home.
Yep. Rekitta, your turn. 1 minute for this speed date.
It affects, I believe, it affects people in a way where their self-esteem, it really affects, and it's transferred from the person that's being abused to, like my colleagues say, to, if you have children, to the children, because you can't really get a clear sense of what's, normal in that environment. So, that has to be healed and eradicated totally, because, we raise families to go into the communities to build communities, and we have to have healthy families so we can have healthy communities. So, that's the key. Everything that we do at home with our kids, our grandkids, our nieces, our nephews, to help them to grow and develop to be healthy individuals, young adults and adults, is a reflection of what goes on in the household, within the family unit. And if you don't have a healthy family unit, it's hard to say it's going to be hard to have a healthy community, because they can only bring to the community what they have. You only can give what you have, and I think that we have to start recognizing and realizing we have to create healthy family structures so we can have healthy communities. We can have loving communities. We could have whole communities and people who have compassion and love for each other, So I think that's the most important thing. You know, what goes on within the household also spills over to the community. You know, if we have a lot of houses that are dealing with trauma, abuse, it's hard to say that you're not going to have that spill over into the community environment.
Yes. Thank you so much. Nicole, I would like for you to answer this question. It says someone would like to know, how does a person, or how do you as a man report domestic violence when in the society we live in, it's laughed at by many because men are supposed to be strong? And after Nicole answers, Zenene, would you please follow up? Because that's one of the things that, you know, men look at, that one of the barriers to them reporting, because they don't want to be the laughing stock to know that a woman has done something to them.
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to try to address some of those as I was reading them. So I thank you for bringing that up. So in relation to as a man dealing with domestic violence, as a woman, you can use the resources that are before you, and you would put a plan in place, an escape plan in place. And the plan has to include how you are remaining safe in the home, how you remain safe in the execution of the plan, and then how you remain safe after the plan. A lot of courts do have male advocates for the specific purpose of helping male victims, because we know that it's a very sensitive issue. And it's an issue that has to be addressed from that perspective. One of the other good things I'll say is a lot of our shelters understand that males experience domestic violence. And so now that a lot of our shelters do offer men shelters for domestic violence. Have we gotten far enough? Absolutely not. I think the more that we push for these things, the more we'll see that there's actually more victims than we realize. But it's going to take that one person. It's going to take that group or that community effort to say that there are men suffering from this as well. But we have to start reporting it, and we have to start reporting it fairly. And I think we also have to train our police officers better when they go to a domestic violence situation and they see that the female is the perpetrator versus the male, that they handle that as gently and as adequately as they would if it were a woman. So there are a number of things that do need to take place. However, if it is a man, I encourage that man to follow the systems that are in place with the court. I encourage them to create an escape plan, and I encourage them to follow through with the plan if it is safe enough for them to leave. Not only until it is safe for them to leave. And then I do want to say one other thing, because there was another question that I have to address. And I understand that this is oftentimes just a mantra or a myth that's perpetrated, that victims don't want to fight or don't want to leave the situation. So let me just put this out here while we're on here. No victim wants to be abused. No victim wants to remain in that situation. Every victim is fighting daily to survive. And so I just want to make sure that we don't continue with the myth. Well, if they're staying, they want to. And I can tell you that's the furthest thing from the truth. And when we start breaking that myth apart, people will begin to understand that we're not looking at, why is she staying? Let's talk about, why is he abusing her? Let's address that. Let's address the sickness and the illness that comes with wanting to control. That's what we need to talk about. Not why is she staying, but why is she being abused? Why is he abusing her, or why is she abusing him? So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Zenene, I know you put something in the chat, but if...
Yes, I just wanted to speak to the issue concerning our men being abused. Programs are required to serve men the same way that we would serve a female survivor. And so I know for us, we get calls from men. We don't get very many. We may get 2 a year. But when we do, we provide the same services. If we can't locate a shelter to put them in, then we will place them in a hotel, and we will pay for it until we can get them relocated into a safer long-term situation. We provide the same case management, the same legal advocacy, the same services that we would provide a female. And so if any men are out there that are being abused or have been abused, again, like Ms. Fishman said, get to, make sure it's safe so that you're able to exit or plan or whatever you need to do. But if there is any program that denies services, that needs to go, fight, because that is it's not permitted, it's not allowed, and neither is it right. So the same way we would fight for any other service that we are entitled to, that men need to fight for that service if that's something that they're needing.
Thank you both. So I think what I would add to your question, to the question is, because there were some key words inside of there that said men are supposed to be strong. And society has failed our young boys and our young men, and even in our parenting, if I'm honest. Some parents have really failed the young boys and the young men and older men simply because they are told that they have to be strong. And it's not just a one-sided coin. Women suffer because we are told we have to be strong Black women. And so let's just say, in order to break that down, to help someone report it, is to remember that being strong is taking care of your own safety. And we have to break down the very language that helps to perpetuate the violence and the isolation that keeps us from feeling like we can't be in service to ourselves because of what people will think. The question that I would have to ask is, and I would ask any man this, any person this, do you have to be so strong until you die? And if the answer is no, I would just say, find that person who's a safe person with you, and that you know that you can unmask your own pain and ask that person to walk with you. Somebody that you know that you can have that will be confident, that won't breach your confidence or won't breach your trust in confidentiality, and will walk with you through this. Because nobody has told you to be strong unto death or death in any situation. It is about living to help somebody another day. And so while society is telling you that you have to be so strong, I'm saying to you today that you get to be so weak that it strengthens you so much that you find that safe space, you find that safe person, and you make that report. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says, because you get to live another day. You get to live another hour. You get to live another minute. Your family gets to hold you. Your child gets to see you. You get to show up and be a voice for people who have gone through what you are going through. It's sad that as Black people, or as people, period, that the biggest things that keep us separated, is the fact that they're always telling us, especially Black people or men, that you have to be so strong. And that strength causes oppression, depression, suppression, isolation, and it diminishes and devalues us. And we in it, because of the stories that it's telling us. So whether it's you, from the person who asked the question, to you knowing someone, encourage that person that the strongest thing that they can do is be in service to themselves. And maybe there's ways that you can call and make that report, but I just encourage you to take that first step and bunk what society says, because society is not connected to your destiny. Society is not connected to your future. And we know for a fact, whatever happens to you, society's only going to talk about it for 30 seconds. And that'll be it. So I encourage you, be strong enough to live another day by taking that one step and reporting it. And what that says to me is we need to build out some supports where men will feel strong, feel like they can come. LGBTQ plus, trans, they have services and resources, safe places where they too can unmask and disrobe in their own pain and be supported. Again, Zenene, Rekitta, Nicole, Thank you so much for standing courageously, fiercely, and powerfully, but yet beautifully in who you are and all that you've done. I wish you the best in everything that you do. I wish that everything that you touch, it heals. Everything that is broken, you can help to make it whole. I hope and I pray that every word that comes out of your mouth, it is a word that plants a seed in someone else's belly, and it gives them life and strength enough just to do what they need to do, to discern what is it going to take for them to live another day. I want to thank the participants and the audience for listening to these stories and for bringing forth your questions, because without those questions, we don't get to plant other seeds for anybody else. So thank you for coming and allowing us to witness you through your questions, to support you and to be a part, of healing together. What I'd like to do is bring you all back together. If there are audience members who want to participate, let's think about, how do we heal together? How do we heal together? And I definitely would love to have that conversation. I want to thank Kara Solutions for the logistical support that they give. Without them, this would not happen. I invite our listeners, there were links to each one of the speakers' webpage, their Twitter page, their Facebook page, Rekitta's blog. Go check them out, support them. Maybe, if you're not getting what you need where you live, or maybe you don't know, where to go, they can be a resource. Go to Black Women Rising, BLAQUE Women Rising, our Facebook page, and you can send a message to me. But I also encourage you to go to our YouTube page, subscribe and like and follow us. So when the next conversation happens, that you will get a ding or a bing or whatever it is you get, reminding you that we are having a conversation again. On November 11th, I invite you to join us just from the last question that was asked. We're going to talk about the angry Black woman and demystifying the angry Black woman. Truth of the matter is, all of what I heard today, do we not have a right to be angry? But the real question is, are we really angry? Or are we learning to set boundaries and have some non-negotiables in our life? And then picking up from that, demystifying, why is it being a man, you have to be strong? Why can't you crumble and break? Why can't you be supported and safe? Join us in these conversations, because it's real out here. Grief is real. Pain is real. Loss is real. And when we are grieving the loss of ourselves, and when we are grieving our own pain, that says a whole lot. So I invite you to join us as we continue to have these conversations, so that we can come together individually and collectively and start breaking down barriers that isolate and separate, and identifying ways that we can come together. Again, thank you, Zenene, Rekitta, and Nicole, Kara Solutions, for what you do. And I want to thank our audience for just participating. You could have been anywhere else, but you chose to join us. And we don't take that lightly. And remember, there is a word for everything that you're going through. And join us every other Thursday, because you just might find that word. Again, November the 11th, demystifying the angry Black woman. After that, we want to talk about breaking down the Black man schema, or the male schema that you have to be strong in everything that you do. But until then, everybody be great in who you are. Be powerfully you. Show up and show out, because you know what? Somebody needs to see all of you and all that you do. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.